Ellen's plaintive letter to her grandfather decrying Virginia's backwardness relative to New England. The Washington socialite Margaret Bayard Smith, who grew close to Jefferson while he was president, visited him at Monticello several months after he had happily retired from public service when his second term ended. Smith's report was bleak. "No vestige of the labor of man appeared," she wrote in her diary in 1809 as she ascended Jefferson's Mountain. "Nature seemed to hold an undisturbed dominion," she went on. "As we rose, I cast my eyes around, but could discern nothing but untamed woodland. After miles, winding upwards, we saw a field of corn, but the road was still wild and uncultivated." Smith was shocked to encounter the progressive philosopher whom she loved so much in such retrograde physical surroundings. Except for his spectacular house, there was no sign of civilization. Ellen had spent a great deal of her early childhood at Monticello, and she had moved there permanently with her parents and siblings when Jefferson retired. Margaret Bayard Smith almost certainly encountered at Monticello the then 13-year-old Ellen, who knew little of the world outside of rural Virginia. In the years that followed, Ellen and her sisters Cornelia and Virginia regularly accompanied Jefferson to his Bedford County retreat, Poplar Forest, spending weeks at a time in relative isolation with him there. Ellen, considered the most intellectual of Jefferson's grandchildren, had a special bond with her grandfather. She knew him well enough to know that he would be particularly interested in her observations about her new surroundings, for he had devoted his public career to the improvement of the new nation, and particularly of his beloved Virginia. He would want to know what was happening in other parts of the Union. Jefferson was then 82 years old. His once robust body was failing, as were his personal fortunes. The country's first panic, what we call recessions or depressions, in 1819, the disastrous co-signing of a loan for a relative who defaulted, and his lack of attention to his spending over the years as he tried to maintain the standard of living expected of members of his class, all taken together, put him in dire financial straits. The house he had been building and remodeling for over 5 decades was in a constant state of disrepair. It needed painting and to have the roof fixed. Yet throngs of visitors continued to come up the mountain to pay him homage, or, as his overseer Edmund Bacon Riley suggested in his recollections of Jefferson and Monticello, to save themselves a tavern bill. Jefferson had spent decades on the public stage, attempting to shape the contours of both the state he first knew as his country, and then the new country that had emerged from the American Revolution. Conceding defeat in his attempt to turn Virginia into a truly Republican society, he turned his attention in his later years to creating a state university that would train young men to take up and finish the task he had started. But that was for the future. What had happened in the past to bring them to the present that both Ellen and he found so unsatisfying? Ellen had a simple and devastating explanation for the stark differences between New England and Virginia. "Our southern states cannot hope to match the prosperity and improvement of the northern states, whilst the canker of slavery eats into their hearts and diseases the whole body by this ulcer at the core." This stark sentiment wasn't new to Jefferson. Ellen could have read a similar indictment in his own published book, Notes on the State of Virginia, 1787, in which he decried slavery's injustice and its demoralizing effects on the manners of white slave owners and their children. How could these self-professed Republicans sustain their experiment in self-government when the whole commerce between master and slave was, in his words, a perpetual exercise?